So, Father God, we just thank you for this time. We thank you for this opportunity, Lord, to talk about adoption, Father. In your word, you talk about taking care of the widow and the orphan. So, Lord, we just thank you for Patti, who has taken that, she and John, who have taken that charge to care for the orphan, and for Holly, Lord, who helps families, unite and adopt children, because we know that that is your will. So we just thank you, and we ask your blessing on this time. In Jesus' name, amen. Hello, I'm Sonya Hines, and welcome to another episode of Navigating Christian Womanhood. Approximately 140,000 children are adopted by American families each year. And today we'll be talking about adoption. My guest is Patti Hudgins and Holly Lamsen. Now, Patti and her husband, John, are parents of 13 children, 3 biological children and 10 adopted children. And Holly, she is the director of adoption services at New Hope Family Services. So welcome, ladies.
Thanks. It's nice to be here.
Now, New Hope, let me tell you about New Hope first. New Hope Family Services is a pregnancy resource center and certified adoption agency nonprofit organization providing confidential, compassionate care for those clients that are seeking counsel for pregnancy, adoption, and parental resources. So, Patti, we're going to start with you. Okay. Now, how did you know that you wanted to become an adoptive parent?
A long time ago, when I was a little girl growing up in Phoenix, New York, just down the road, the family next door to me did foster care and adoption, and I just remember being amazed by their family and their love and answering questions, and I even told my husband when we were dating that one day, if God would line it up and allow it, that I would love to adopt one day. So for a long, long time, even when I was a child.
So tell us about your first adoption.
So we got married, and then we were sent overseas. We were both in the Air Force. I got out when I had our son, and then we had 2 more, and then we went to England. And when we were coming back stateside, we were stationed in Arkansas. And the preacher's wife worked at a Christian agency and asked me if I would be a foster mom. And I said, actually, I want to be an adoptive mom. And she said, actually, we just need a foster mom. So I thought, so we started doing that, care for newborns, so that the birth mom and the birth family would have time to really think about their decision, and the adoptive families wouldn't be given newborns and then 2 or 3 weeks later or a month later be told that, a change had taken place, and it was a time for everybody to pause. And so we just did the interim. And after a couple of years of doing that, they asked us if we wanted to consider adopting. And that was our heart's cry from the beginning. Right. We just had to be patient. So we adopted our daughter Olivia 25 years ago, and Rebecca 21 years ago, and Josiah 20 years ago from Bethany Christian Services.
In Arkansas?
Yes.
Okay.
We had moved to Albuquerque. They had stationed us, but we were able to finish doing some paperwork and go back to Little Rock and be a resource at that time.
Okay. Now, but then you've adopted more.
Right. So then when we went from having 3 children to 6 with the 3 separate adoptions, and then we came back to New York, and we believed at that time that our family was done with 6. And then a country neighbor, 3 miles away, was telling me about foster care in New York State and how that worked. Okay. And so we decided to be a resource for a sibling group that she had, and eventually adopted them. And then as a few years went on, we added 4 more siblings to the 3 siblings we already had. It's a sibling group of 7. Wow. And that completed our family.
So Holly, tell us what that adoption process looks like in New York State.
Yeah, so in New York State, that adoption process probably looks different than it does in other states, because it varies by state. But generally what that was going to look like is attending orientation first. Right. So getting oriented with adoption, learning a little bit more about adoption, and specifically whatever agency you're going through. And then you go through a home study process. And home study is very intense. It's a very intense process for our families. There's interviews, there's trainings. It normally lasts about 4 months long. Okay. It's pretty intensive. Lots of questions, lots of paperwork. But if you're going through a good agency, they're going to be supporting you along the way and providing really quality education so that you know what you're getting into and you know exactly what to expect, as much as you can know what to expect in situations like that. And then you're normally put on a wait list and you're waiting for that call that's going to change your life.
Wow. So tell us how adoption has changed your life.
I'm glad that Holly's here today because at one time when we first moved back to New York State, just a couple years after that, we started the orientation classes and were asked a lot of hard questions and really thinking through the situation. And in a very kind and wonderful way, we found out that it was time for our family to take a time out. It wasn't a good time. We just needed to pause. Mm-hmm. We were getting our oldest child off to Houghton Christian College, and it was a really busy time. And we found out through the classes that right now we didn't have the time to give. And so it wasn't no. It was just like a pause. And then we worked for Toomey Services in Syracuse, and a couple years later, and through the counseling and the information and the questions they asked, we felt at that time that was a good time to go. And adoption, I thought because I was a biological parent that I would already know how to parent. Mm-hmm. And I can't even tell you how many times I called the caseworkers because the children had been through things that my biological children hadn't been through. Okay. And their resources, the psychologists, the psychiatrists, the doctors, mm-hmm. And I didn't know that I needed that. So having been through the orientation and been familiar with the caseworkers and the director and people then, and they said, call us, don't wait.
Right.
And so I didn't know that there was such a network of help out there for people who want to do this.
Now, Holly, could there be, in light of what Patti shared, do you find that there is some fear or concerns in adopting because, how your pregnancy went, mm-hmm. You're very familiar with the whole process from beginning to, birth.
Sure.
You may not always be privy to all of that information mm-hmm. when you're adopting a child. Mm-hmm. So would you say that that's something that makes parents or people concerned or fearful of adopting?
I would say so, yes. I think the fear of the unknown is probably the biggest fear for families going through the adoption process. Like you said, not knowing necessarily all the background information,
right?
Not knowing how things are going to pan out, not knowing when you're going to get that call, and not knowing what to do when your children is exhibiting certain behaviors or
right.
talking about certain things. That can be a really hard thing as a parent to try to navigate and figure out. But I love what you said, that there is such a network of support out there, and like your agency, like you said, should be able to provide that support to you.
Right.
And there's so much research going on with adoption right now, and a lot of older adoptees are speaking out about their experiences, and that's really where a lot of the research is coming from. Okay. They're saying, like, I went through this, and this is how I felt, and this is what would have helped me, or this is what did help me.
Right.
And so there's just so much more research out there, and so many more supports, I think, for adoptive families that they might not even know about. So while I think it is a fear, we have a lot of tools to combat that fear with, which is really great.
Now, are there other concerns that people have when it comes to adopting?
I think so. I think the biggest one that we see is fear of birth moms.
Okay.
That's a big one that we see in the adoption realm. There's lots of fears around that because it's an unknown, right? Just like we talked about. You don't really know her that much. Sometimes you get to know her really well. Sometimes in certain situations you don't.
Okay.
And so she's kind of an unknown variable in this. We try to make that not the case. We try to get to know her as well as we can. We try to encourage open adoption when it's healthy and it can be a good thing. But she's still kind of an unknown variable, and that can be a little bit of a fear for some people. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. You're fine.
And so I think that's a really big one for people. There's this idea, especially people first starting through the adoption process who haven't gone through education or, listen to adoptee voices or things like that, who think that the birth mom's going to come in the middle of the night and take the child away, right? That's a huge fear. We hear that. And I mean, that's in some ways valid, right? That's what you think about in your brain as like the biggest fear. And that's just simply not what happens. Birth moms they're just humans. They're just
Yeah.
women going through a hard time and decide to make an adoption plan lovingly for their child.
Right.
And there's a lot of hurt and pain that comes along with that. And so they're
Mhm.
hurting in those times. And so they're not this, crazed person who's going to chop at your door with an axe. They're not going to do those things.
Right.
And so I think a lot of that that fear can just be put away through education and prayer. Asking the Lord to change your heart towards the birth mom of your child, or whoever, even if it's future birth mom for your child, that is a heart change that takes place, and the Lord is really faithful in that, alongside of your agency providing that good education.
Now, what about you, Patti, in your relationship with the birth mom, or do you have a relationship with the birth moms for your adopted children?
When I first started doing foster care, we invited at one time a birth mom into our home. And we had, because there was no fear for us, because we were only doing this for a couple of weeks.
Right.
And so I think in my life, God used that to show me how real they are and how broken they are and how ashamed they are sometimes. And they're so beautiful. And they're going through this awful, awful thing, and they need so much help. And and they love their babies so much. And so to see that side of it. And then at one time, about 24 years ago, we were given a daughter and asked to adopt her, and we started all the paperwork, but something wasn't right. And I knew it, but I thought I was being a little paranoid. And then the caseworker called and said that the birth father had chosen as an adult to not tell his parents. He wanted to walk through this. He was sorry and ashamed, and he was a college student. He had so much promise, and he was 19. And I had little boys at that time, and I couldn't imagine them going through something like that and not sharing that with one person. And so he broke down and told his mother, and his mother wanted to adopt his child. And it was beautiful,
Yes.
except I had her, and I thought she was my daughter. And so I feel like God used that at that time to show me one tiny speck. I don't pretend to know everything that goes on in there, but I had her for a couple of months, and we were pressing forward with all the paperwork. And so I felt like God used that in my life to show me one tiny page of what it might feel like to have to give up a child. And it wrecked me. But it was beautiful. And the next time I had to go, this was way back in the old days. I wasn't in a covered wagon, but I mean, it's a long time ago, and things have changed a lot in adoption. And so I actually went to the hospital to get a newborn a couple years later, and the birth mom was 14. And she was in the hospital room, and I went in and we talked, and she cried and I cried and the grandmother cried, and then I started to walk out, and she was just choking and sobbing, and I turned around and went back, and she just wasn't ready. And I spent another 15 minutes in there with her and told her that I would send pictures and just walking her through that. And so I think that I can't imagine being like in my 20s and not having been able to have children, which is a road my friends have walked, and then to be afraid of the birth mom or wonder if she's going to come. I think, I just think there's so many discussions and classes and information that people have to talk through and think about that and be willing to say, hey, I think about this, or what if, or I think that's so important.
I agree. I think knowledge and knowing, at least head knowledge, right, of what birth parents go through emotionally and physically and all of those things is just such a fundamental thing for understanding adoption. It gives you a good, firm basis of understanding adoption and what it really means and how it affects every member of the triad. It's so important. So thank you for sharing. That. It sounds like that was, even though it was such a painful experience, it really helped you have a lot of empathy and understanding for birth parents and what they go through. And I'm sure that helped you in your understanding of your children as well.
Oh, yeah. And subsequently, a couple years later, when we were approached by the director saying that she had a young birth mom that wanted to give her daughter up for adoption and had chosen our family, but she wondered if at that time they asked the adoptive parents to provide pictures of the child up to and including their first birthday to help them to see that they're doing great and all that. But she said she wanted pictures up to at least 3 years. and having been through, and I was a little older then, and I was like, absolutely. I didn't even have to think about it.
Yeah.
You just become like, you just get settled in the process.
Mm-hmm.
And the fears were more, I don't know, it just felt more natural. As the time went on, of course there's a birth mom, of course there's a birth father.
Yes.
How can I help those grandparents? And some of that came for me with age too. I can't imagine having that wisdom at 25.
Right.
I needed
Yeah.
to, yeah.
So with the children that you have adopted, so they do have a relationship with their birth mom? How's the birth mom involved in that?
Right. So we worked with Toomey Services, and the children were actually foster care in New York State. It was
Okay.
actually foster children. And so for the 18 months or 2 years process of walking them through every chance to reunite the family, it was different from the adoption side. This was
Okay.
the foster care side. And so the birth family relationship is very much intact, and there's visits, and they go to the school meetings with the and so but then we moved to the adoption side of it when reunification was not going to happen.
Okay.
And then we chose to just let the children be children and not to have a relationship at that time with their birth parents until they were adults and could make that decision on their own. And it's interesting that my adult children have made such different decisions in their own life, but it's very personal. And so we let them do that.
Right. How would you say, in terms of the conversation with them about being adopted, what was that like for them?
We, with the resources from our agency, were told to bring that up even with small children when they didn't ask,
Okay.
which was new for me.
Okay.
When they're, when they were even small children, I would say, I met your mom and your eyes sparkled like hers. And we would talk about that. Or
Wow.
when they were a little older on their birthday, and they would say, ask questions about their birth. And I would say things about their birth parents and visits that they had and little memories that they kind of had. And for me, I thought this is going to be a difficult conversation.
Right.
So let's change the subject and I'll go get them ice cream. Let's not walk through this pain.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But our counselors were like, no, turn around and face it. And you talk them through that, even if they cry, even if they're sad, even if they're angry, even if they have questions about why they can't go now. I do that all the time now with even the children now. And it's, I don't want to lead them. I want them to lead that conversation.
Yes.
And I'm still learning how to validate their feelings without getting my feelings hurt. And, it's not about me. And so I still feel like I'm learning.
There's a lot of heart investment.
Yeah.
Heart investment.
And sometimes they don't understand that right now my birth family is not able to parent me, but it doesn't mean they don't love me. And it's hard for them to understand that sometimes parents make decisions for their children at this time. And you don't always know if you're doing the right thing.
Right.
And I still call my caseworkers. We closed our home and retired as foster parents a couple of years ago, but I still pick up the phone and they're amazing and wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
And so much new information, trauma, and all this like we didn't know. And so when you
Right.
know better, you have to do better.
Yeah.
And so you have to
Exactly.
keep educating yourself
Yeah.
and your children and saying, well, back when we adopted you, we didn't know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I know. I love hearing that even though it's hard and it's easy to get your feelings hurt and all of those things, like you still push forward and
Yes.
still
Yeah.
bring up those topics because
Yeah.
children don't have the words for that all the time.
Yes.
They have these feelings inside them, especially young children, and they
Right.
can't connect it. They don't know where it's
Right.
coming
Yeah.
from or have the words to bring it up. And then as they get older, they feel like they can't bring up adoption sometimes.
Right.
Like I'm gonna hurt my
Right.
parents if I say this,
Right.
or what are they gonna think of me? Are they,
Uh-huh.
I mean, all those fears are in their little hearts and in their minds, and so that's why it's so important to bring it up first and let them know, like, hey, like you can talk to me about this at any time. If you have questions, please tell me, and like we're gonna talk about adoption. I'm gonna bring it up. Because
Yes.
then it allows them, when they do have questions and they do have those words to put to it, they feel like they can come to their parents. and talk to them about that, which is so important. And then you have the blessing of being able to walk through that with them, which really strengthens your relationship with your children. Even though it is, we're talking about pain, we're talking about hard things, we're talking about all of these big feelings that they don't even know how to grapple with. But when they view you as a safe person, it's going to make your relationship stronger and ultimately make your family stronger, that you can walk through those things together.
I can imagine that it would make it stronger, as opposed to not having the conversation, not letting them know about that process, and then maybe them finding out later and them possibly resenting the the parents who've adopted them. So I guess it's safe to say that New Hope, you all encourage that kind of communication. And do you encourage an open adoption with the mom or with the parents, the birth parents?
We do, as long as it's the healthy situation. So what we actually require, I know you mentioned letters and pictures. We do require that for, I would say, 99.9% of our adoptions. That's a requirement for all adoptive families until the child is 18.
Oh, until they're 18.
So pretty much all their childhood. That's something that we do require. Normally it is twice a year that they would be sending letter and picture updates. They do send them to the agency, and then we pass those along to the birth family. We did that
as well.
Yeah, which is a really great way. It really helps with the birth parents healing a lot. Then it opens that communication a little bit between them if they want that communication to go back and forth. The birth parents have the ability to also send letters back. Sometimes we'll have people ask questions. So like if your 5-year-old is like, well, what's my birth mom's favorite color? I said, well, I don't know that, sweetie. Let's write that in a letter and let's send it and we'll see if we'll get an answer. And so sometimes they do kind of go back and forth like that, which is really cool. We do have some birth parents that don't want to get that correspondence. They don't want to get those letters and pictures. They would rather have more of a closed adoption. In those situations, we do still require the adoptive parents to send that information to the agency, but we just keep it. We hold it for them, and then at any point in their lives, they can call and say, I do want to see, what my child looks like or what their interests are, and they can pick up just a whole stack of letters and pictures, which is really great. Because sometimes they're just not ready in that moment, in that hospital room or right when it's fresh. Sometimes, a coping mechanism is distance, right? We all use that. And so, they're like, I can't right now. But then 5 years down the road, they might want that. And so we want to have that available to them.
Wow. So it's obviously or definitely a win-win situation as a parent wanting to adopt children and take them in, and then that child needing, a loving family and a safe place to go, and that parent or mother who, just decide I can't do this right now in my life for whatever reason. It seems like a very loving situation. So Patti, with 10 adopted children, let's talk about finances, because I can imagine that that's also another thing where people say, well, I don't know if I can afford to do this.
Right. So for us, when we started out, I was a stay-at-home mom and my husband was active duty Air Force. And when they first asked us, we realized that it was more costly than we knew. And so we started talking to people, and we didn't even know at that time, the United States Air Force said, if you adopt a child, let us help you with that. And so we didn't even know that existed. And I have to imagine that there are other programs like that but I've also heard of grandparents and people just saying, we've started this process, and I just think there's different ways. And then when we decided to do foster care, the state pays for the lawyers and the doctors and the therapy, and so that was totally different.
Now, do you find that is a concern sometimes as well?
Yes, there are situations where that is a concern. I mean, adoption is expensive. Kind of, there's no way around that. It does depend on what agency you go with. Prices kind of vary depending on where you go and what state you're in. So it does vary, but there are options like that, like you mentioned with the Air Force being able to help out. A lot of companies, if they're big enough, normally have some type of adoption incentive. They'll reimburse some amount of those adoption expenses, which is really great. There's also a lot of grants out there
Wow.
that are available to families who are looking
okay.
to adopt. A lot of them are reimbursing grants, so you have to have the money
Right.
up front, but then they'll reimburse you.
Okay.
But it's still an option that a lot of our adoptive families do use, which
Wow.
is definitely helpful for them.
Oh,
And then, as you said, a lot of like family members, grandparents,
Yeah.
like, oh, I'll help you with this fee, or I'll help you with this fee.
Right.
So I definitely think with some, ingenuity and kind of puzzle pieces putting
Mhm.
together,
Mhm.
it can be more affordable than some people think.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So Patti, now you took adoption like to a whole nother level, because not only did you adopt, right, 10 kids, right, and you had 3 of your own, but you homeschooled all of your children.
I used to make fun of people who homeschool. If I'm going to be totally honest and put everything out there, I told my sister-in-law, "What are you doing, and why are you doing that?" And then I called her and said, "Wait, how does that work?" So that's been interesting, but it's also, I feel like God has blessed that in that sometimes they'll be sitting down doing math and they'll be just staring off into space, and then they'll say, "When I was at my visit yesterday," and then the world stops and we get to walk through that.
Right.
So that's been really neat.
Well, I tell you, you're like my homeschool hero mom.
Yeah,
You are.
I am crawling to the finish line. I am old. I tell God all the time, and I've been begging God this last couple of years to just like help me parent this little caboose set the way I did my older children.
Yes.
Like, you have to just stay in the game and just keep going.
Engage. I know that normally when you have
Yeah.
children, they say, oh, the youngest one kind of gets away with a lot because they're tired by then. Well, you can't get tired, right?
No,
It's just
right.
tired.
Right, I know.
So, Holly, let me just ask you, where's my question here? Okay, so as a parent, you've decided that, or as a husband and wife, you've decided that you're going to adopt. What's that next step?
I would say that next step is some research. So look into adoption agencies in your area.
Okay.
Kind of whittle down some options for you. There's generally a few different options to choose from. And then, also trying to look at, do you want to adopt domestically? Do you want international? Kind of thinking through what you're looking for, because that will help you tailor what agency you choose.
Okay.
Right? If you want
Right.
to adopt internationally, you have to choose an adoption agency that does that.
Okay.
You can't choose
Yeah.
one that doesn't. So like things like that. I would say the first step is going to be some research in that, but even calling these places and asking questions, trying to see what their services are, trying to see if it's going to be a good fit.
Okay.
I always like it when people say, "Can I come in and like take a tour?" I'm like, "That's so smart. Like,
Right.
you want like
Right.
you're going to be you're going to be tied to this organization for life."
Yeah.
You're going to be, like you said, you're going to be calling the agency,
Oh,
calling
yeah.
your caseworker,
Yes.
asking questions,
Yep.
doing all these things. So it's a big commitment. So you want
Right.
to make sure that it's going to be a good fit. You like the people that work there.
Right.
It's not sketchy. All of those things. You want to check it out first.
Right.
So I definitely say research online, and then calling people, going in person to the agencies if you can is a great first step. And then after that, kind of depending on which organization you choose, they'll kind of lead you from there into what the next steps would
Kind
be.
of put together an adoption plan, so
Yeah.
to speak.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, what about that mother or father who want to put their child up for adoption? How does New Hope assist that person?
Yeah. So we have a phone dedicated to expectant parents who are looking to make an adoption plan for their child. So that phone gets passed around so that it's always covered by someone. And so it's a direct line to someone who works in adoption, just because New Hope does some other things too. So we don't want to get lost in the shuffle, right? So we have a direct line to that they can call. And then we have birth parent advocates on staff whose whole job is to assist them. So they get wraparound support for as long as they need it, even if it's for 20 years.
Wow.
They can get it. Everything is free of charge for them, so they don't have to pay a dime to New Hope or for anything. So our birth parent advocates, they meet with them, they travel to them, because we service most of New York State, all of upstate New York. And so if they don't have a car, they have transportation issues, anything like that. Our birth parent advocates do a lot of traveling. They spend lots of hours in the car, and they go and they meet with women and their boyfriends, spouses, whoever it is, and talk through their options.
Wow.
Everything is really not pressurized either.
Okay.
We really try to make sure that we're not being obviously coercive or manipulative or anything.
Right.
It's her decision, and adoption is not right for everyone.
Right.
It's really not. Making an adoption plan is a hard thing. It's a hard choice. It's a loving choice, but it's not good for everyone. And so we really try to talk through their options with them and say, this is what it's going to look like. Are you comfortable with this? And really just allow them space to think about it and make that decision
Right.
in like a non-pressurized way. And so we walk through that whole process with them of deciding if they want to choose the family. We walk through that with them. All of placement, at the hospital, we're there at the hospital if they want us to be. If not, we're not there. We really just go by what she wants.
Okay.
And we take, kind of follow her lead in that. And then we also do follow-up meetings afterwards, because that's where all the pain really hits, right? That's where it becomes a reality.
Yes.
Because there's again, we already talked about all the loss that is experienced on that end. And so our birth parent advocates are there for them. Texting, calling, checking up, making sure they're okay. And like I said, we do that for as long as needed. Some kind of drop off and we lose contact with them, unfortunately, but we do try to maintain contact for as long as possible and provide that support and that listening ear for them.
Well, I thank you both. I mean, this has been really informative from the adoptive, parent side as well as the agency side. So again, my guests, Patti Hudgins and Holly Lamsen with New Hope Family Services. Thank you for joining us on Navigating Christian Womanhood.